Welcome to Change Management, setting your team up for success during and after onboarding. My name is Xander Karsten, and today we'll be going through some ins and outs of change management within LegalServer and the LegalServer environment. So we're going to just start with a little bit of context setting and just the essentials. So when we talk about change management, when I talk about change management, oftentimes there are questions of what change are we talking about? And well, we oftentimes focus on onboarding, the process of coming from a different system into LegalServer. This can really apply to any change that your agency is facing. So whether it's new funding, whether it's a new grant requirement that wasn't there before, whether it is a new piece of software or infrastructure that you're adding in, whether it's new staff. New staff is oftentimes like a big change, both for your existing staff and for the person coming on. So when I talk about change management here, I'm really talking these different tools within LegalServer can really be applied to any change that your agency is facing. The next question that folks oftentimes ask is who are we future-proofing for? And who is doing the future-proofing itself? Honestly, we're usually future-proofing, again, for everyone, both for our users who are going to be interacting with the system, using the system, maybe entering information into the system. We're also, though, future-proofing for ourselves, right? So as admins at LegalServer, we oftentimes are doing many things at one time, wearing a lot of different hats. And the more that we can leave information for our future selves, set things up so that less needs to be changed, less needs to be handled, we can definitely make sure that our future selves, who I like to think of as a whole different person than the person I am today, right? The person that I'm going to be in 3 months has a different set of priorities, maybe doesn't remember what the person 3 months ago did. It's a whole different person. The next question that I often get asked is when, either in a project or just generally, when do I look towards that future proofing, that change management? And I love to say, as with everything, the best time was yesterday and the second best time is today. So as we go into a project, thinking at the very beginning, as we're setting it up, what are the things that we can do today to set up our future selves and our users for success in a week, in 3 months? What is the documentation we can think about collecting now? What are the little breadcrumbs we can leave now? What are the processes we can put in place now? And if you're at the very end of a project, that's great. Starting again and thinking back through the life cycle of that project, what are the things we can put together now? Today, we're going to really be focusing on tools and different processes within LegalServer. Obviously, there are other places that you can future-proof your systems. A lot of the skills are highly transferable, but I'm really going to focus in the LegalServer ecosystem because that's where I live, is in the LegalServer ecosystem. And finally, there's the how. And the how is what we're going to focus on for the next 10, 15 minutes. All right, so let's do that. The first place to really think about the future-proofing, thinking about leaving information for users, really thinking about how to communicate changes to users is in the front end of LegalServer, keeping it public, letting your users know what to do and what not to do. There are 3 super simple tools that are available right now for you to use. One is that bubble help that we see on the left-hand side, and this allows you to really communicate discreetly with your staff. So this is a great place for scripts that your staff may not need to say all the time to clients. So maybe you have a very well-developed intake script that you want to say to your users, that you want that interaction. And your new staff members, they need to see that. They need to know where it is. They're getting used to it. They're getting used to that rhythm. Your old hands, though, they've got it down, right? They ask all the questions in exactly the way that you want them to be asked. No problem. Or perhaps it is questions that your clients may ask infrequently, but frequently enough that you want them available right there. So this gives a little bubble, the question mark in it. We'll see this in a second. And when you hover over that, it gives you a pop-up of what the text is. The other one, and we're seeing the back end of an instruction in the screenshot here, and we'll see it from the front end in just a minute. An instruction box shows up for everyone all the time. So these are really great for big changes that are being made that you want staff to really be able to see. You'll see instructions used a lot in blocks that are set up by LegalServer. This is for information that folks really should see and should see prominently. Just one caveat about instructions. Sometimes too many instructions on a page will lead to screen blindness. People don't see the individual instructions, so I do really recommend using them sparingly. And the last one that we're going to see in just a second is reporting it out, using embedded reports, using folks' home pages or even case profiles to say, okay, here's some information that you need to see. I think that this is most helpful if you have reporting requirements that have changed, or maybe a new grant that you've gotten and you're worried about folks miscoding data. You can set up a report that pulls in only cases where data is miscoded, and you can put that prominently like on a home page to say, hey, these are 3 cases that you have. You assign them to this funding code, but the data makes them ineligible for this funding code. Ideally, those reports will pull back no results at all, and the results that they do pull back are ones that need attention. So we're going to see how each of these works in practice. So here we're on the applicant's demographic page of an intake. Many people will recognize some of the elements here around citizenship status, gender, race, language. And this is where you really see the difference between that little help bubble and an instruction. So what we see here for gender, this is the help bubble. What we see, please ask for language, this is the instruction. We have another help bubble right here. In this situation, I may not use an instruction for please ask for language because language is required already. So that's another way, making things required, making things not required, but just something to think about. If I come to gender, this is an excellent place to put these sort of instructions like we have here, where you may be concerned if a client pushes back and says, why do you need to know my gender? And then we've got a nice script right here that just talks about why gender is required. It tells you what you're going to do with the information. It tells the client, hey, you can always change this information, all of that good stuff, all in a script that people can easily use. If I come to the back of my form here and I click on my gender field, you'll see under help text, this is where that entire script just lives. So that's how you activate that help text, where it'll show any text that's in the box. So you don't have to enable anything. It's already right there on your site and you're all set here. This is where we also have this instruction. So if I expand this on this form and it says, please ask for language, you can also change this. You can also do some formatting within an instruction. Right now, it's just that instruction. And whatever you put here then shows up in this yellow bar. The final thing that we have here is the embedded report. So I'm on my home page of my site, and if I scroll down, it's going to be a little bit of a scroll here. This is where I have miscoded cases. So these are all cases, and you'll see I have my little data quality report. So these are all of my cases where there is no retainer on this closed case. And you'll see that there are 32 that are assigned. There are 32 out here. Maybe they are cases that are assigned to my supervisees. I could also further restrict this to just cases that are assigned to me. If I come to my admin and I click on Edit Profile, you'll see this is my report part block. And if I expand that, this is where I can select the report that I want. This is also gives me some additional options, the part to display. So I'm displaying the tabular data, just what shows up as like an Excel spreadsheet. I can either view or hide the link directly to the report. Maybe this is a report that you don't want people to be able to go in and view. You could hide that. You also have some options here on what to display and what not to display. Back on my homepage, I can then also just click on this report and you'll see all the long filters that are applied. You could also show those in the embedded part of the report. I don't love that because I think it's a little too messy. I think that just hiding those filters, you can always get to them in the report, is a little bit cleaner. But you can see these are all of the close reasons that are not A or B. For those of you who are LSE funded, you know what this means, and that have no retainer on file. This kind of embedded report is especially helpful, again, if you've got funding requirements that have changed. If you have a new funder that you're able to say, hey, as people are entering data, as they're closing cases, as they're doing intakes, hey, these are cases that need another look. These are cases where maybe the data didn't get entered correctly, maybe the eligibility wasn't fully understood. Take a look at these cases and correct them. Next up is keeping it organized. So in LegalServer, we have categories, groupings, naming conventions, all of which can help you keep your admin side more organized, more ready for you in the future. We talked in the last slide about what your front end users can see and how you can help guide them through changes. In this, we're helping a future you as things change in your own work, in your own life, helping you to keep your information in your workspace in LegalServer more organized. So the first things we're going to talk about are our fields, which have the option of having both categories and groupings. We're going to talk about reports, which also have categories and groupings. They've got another option with favorites. And then just talking a little bit about naming conventions, which are something that I really encourage everyone within an agency, within an organization, to really think through and start discussing. So we're back on a field profile. And this field it's a custom field asking the client to describe the steps they've taken to remedy their situation. Just as we saw before with gender, we have our help text. We also, though, have some things down here. We have our grouping, which is going to help us when we add a field to a form, and we'll see that in a second. And then we have some categories. You can control the categories, the field categories in your system. There's an option in the actions menu on the field list to add new categories. And this is especially helpful if you're building out a lot of fields that maybe you don't have for funders, or if you have a specific purpose for a set of fields. You can report on these categories. You can filter in a list view for fields on these categories. You can really use this to slice and dice your field lists to be able to see those categories. So you'll see, for example, I have a Xander funder one, that every field that's used or that was created for the funder, for a specific funder, could be used. You can also select more than one category. So it may be that, and I hope that it is, that when you are getting new funding, you're looking to fields that already exist for existing reporting purposes. And if the data matches exactly, you can reuse those fields, right? The data is the same. Think about the client name, right? You only have one client name field. You'll use that in a variety of reports for perhaps a variety of funders, but you only have one field. You can do the same for these custom fields, and you could select more than one option here. Grouping is another way to keep things organized, specifically as you add fields to a form. And this is really helpful if you have a lot of fields that are all named the same thing or named things that are very similar, but they're used for very different purposes. And so this really allows you to group these together and then see them all in one place. So I can have a grouping of Xander and I can hit continue. And then when I'm on an auxiliary form and I go to add my field, when I type in briefly, you'll see that grouping comes up under Xander. Alternatively, if I type in the group name, all of the fields will appear. So this really can help you as you're building out forms. Oftentimes, I like to create all my fields first and then build all my forms second. By the time I build all of my forms, I am a different person than I was when I created my fields. Sometimes it's just an hour difference. Sometimes it's more like, a week or two. And this really helps to keep that as smooth as possible. And then I can just go ahead and add my field. The next thing that we have are our reports, which we can also categorize and group. There's also an option for favorites in our reports. So here I am on my reports tab, and we'll see that by default, the only reports that appear are the ones that I have a little heart for, right? That are my favorites. I can remove that filter, and I can see all of my reports, but by default, it defaults to the favorited, and that's a user preference that you can set in your user preferences. When I go in to actually edit a report, under my attributes, we're also going to see the ability to give a report a category. We can also give a report a grouping. This site doesn't have any groupings on it, but this works the same way as we saw it in our fields, where you have multiple options that you can select. You can also provide a category. In this case, we have things like case data, timekeeping, activities, that top level module. Both of these are available in the list view. So you can filter by this. You could also set up a separate list view in reports for the different categories or for the different groupings. So maybe you have a category of data quality reports or a grouping of data quality reports, and you want those to all show as their own tab. You can default your list view to data quality reports and only show that list of reports. These are really helpful. Sometimes we have lists of, in this case, 460 different reports, and those are just the ones that are active, right? So being able to really dice it down into smaller chunks can be really helpful. It can also just be helpful as you are going around and finding different reports to know where they are. The last one is our naming conventions, and this is totally in your hands. We'll see this in just a second, but as you are thinking about what that organizational system looks like and how you want to name your different processes, forms, profiles, just thinking about having a consistent naming convention can really help at both new admins who come in who can easily start identifying, oh, I know what's going on here. And again, your future self who is not going to remember what you did 2 weeks ago. So this is an example of a branch logic form that has a specific naming convention. So again, a branch logic form is one of those forms that gets pulled into a branch logic block. And so in this case, if you pick a language other than English, an LOE, that is Arabic, whatever under the form elements, in this case just an instruction, is going to show up. And so for me, what's really helpful when I look at this is to know, hey, this is on an intake process. If I had more than one intake process, maybe I would specify the intake process. If it's on all the intake processes, I may say all intakes. Language, and maybe you could do language other than English. You could also just say language. And you can always change the spelling, which is key for me. And so I know what field it is referencing. And then I know what option that field that is being selected within that field in order to show the instruction below. If it were everywhere, if it were universal, you may just want to have language equals Arabic. It could be that you have universal. Every time language is asked, you're asking it in branch logic, and this is the selection. I tend to like a naming convention that specifies the process, one or more, the field that's being utilized here, and then the option that is being selected. And this is, again, just for branch logic. You can do the same thing for forms, the same thing for processes, but thinking through what is that equation that is really going to help your users to know what's happening here. And by users, admins in this situation, what's going to help you in the future, what's going to help a new admin coming in to know what's going on. Next up, keeping it documented. So we have a lot of different places within LegalServer for you to add notes, descriptions, I like to think of them as breadcrumbs for your future self so that you know what you're doing, what you were thinking at that time, maybe what the purpose of that form, that field, that process was. So we're going to go through our fields, forms, and processes, all of which have these descriptions and configuration notes, and we will take it from there. So we're back on the field that we discussed before, briefly described the steps the client has taken to remedy the situation. And again, we've talked about our categories, our groupings, but here we're going to talk about the description. And this is not going to show to your front end users. This is only for you as an admin. You'll be able to see it whenever you come into this field profile. You'll also be able to report on it. So we'll talk in a little bit about reports and keeping those and different reports that you can utilize. But this description is only for you, is just for you. It's for future admins to really keep the information as together and as tight as possible. So you may want to put in this description here, field created for housing and employment only. Whatever information is going to help you and give you some context, just remember that because it is reportable, right? Once you have it in a report, you can filter on the text that's in that description. So if you wanted to later look through all of your fields that had the word housing in them to get a sense, you're maybe trying to hunt down a specific field or you're looking for something, you're going to be able to do that if you leave these kinds of breadcrumbs for yourself in the future. Another place that you can leave these breadcrumbs for yourself is in a form. And right now we're on a branch logic form. This could be any form. It doesn't have to be a branch logic form. It could be an auxiliary form. It could be a create form, any of those forms. You've got two options here, right? You have a description here, and then you also have configuration notes. In the back end, technically, there's really no difference between these two. They both have an unlimited character allowance, so you can put in as much text as you want. They also are both reportable. So regardless of whether you do it in the description or you do it in the configuration notes, they're both going to be there. Our list views do show descriptions. They don't show configuration notes, so that may be a good option if you want to be able to see that easily in a description or in the list view rather, but you can get the information and see it in the aggregate for both of these fields. On a form, you'll also notice that in all of our blocks, we also have configuration notes. So again, if you want to leave notes for yourself about why you chose a specific block over a different one, anything like that, you can do that right in the block itself. Finally, you can also add descriptions in our processes. So again, a process is a collection of one or more forms. This situation has got one form, it's got an activity form, but you could have more than one. And so these are that collection of forms, and you can have a process description, which is also reportable, can be seen in a list view, is super helpful if maybe you have a form that belongs to more than one process, but you want to specify what's being used in a specific process, why this particular combination of forms are being used. Finally, we're going to talk about keeping it clean. And this is really using reports to keep everything simple, keeping everything tidy, knowing what's active, what's not active, maybe using these reports to inactivate certain things that are no longer needed at the end of a project, or maybe things that you replaced during the life of a project. These reports can be incredibly helpful to really, again, to just keep everything as simple and as clean as possible. So the first one we have here are our custom fields, and it's only custom because we have a filter that's set to custom is true. If you wanted to see all of the fields, you certainly could. But from here, when I run it, we see the name, the field name, whether or not it's active, any help text, and again, that description, and then a lot more information about each of these. You can also run a query to see if this field is contained on any form. And you can see that this is on a form called Caitlin's first form. So if you're wondering, hey, like these are the 10 custom fields that I created, or just these 10 fields in the system, where are they used? You can always get to a list of those forms from the field itself in that report. I think it's a really helpful, super useful report anytime you're creating a lot of fields or just have a lot of fields in your system. So that's one. And this is available in our report library, in our example reports on our help site. The second one are forms with elements, and this is a little bit newer, but this is going to show us the form itself, a description of that form. And the way I have it set up is it's got a list of the different elements on the system. So you can see we've got blocks, we've got headers, we have tab blocks. Down here we have fields and notes and headers, more blocks. So you can really see what is on each form. You also do have the URL name. So you can copy and paste that into the URL and just see what that form looks like. And then finally, we have a list. I have a list of forms by process. So this will show you the process, whether or not, again, is it active, and then what are the form names in each of those processes. We also have the description and configuration notes for the forms. So you can, again, do some of that searching, do some of that filtering to be able to see different keywords that maybe you've entered into any of those text boxes. Then finally, and we have an entire other session about automating your site, The more that you can automate different things in your system, the more future-proof it's going to be. So we talked at the very beginning about embedded reports showing, hey, these are the cases that maybe were miscoded. You can also make those into scheduled reports. You can create dashboards with those. Anything that kind of lets you check in regularly around those reports just to keep information flowing and to make sure that you're catching when people do make an error, because they will, earlier rather than later. We have guided navigation and branch logic options that will only show the relevant information or fields based on whatever criteria you've entered, so that it really, again, helps just keep the focus. People aren't overwhelmed with a lot of fields and a lot of information. It's just focused in on one thing, which can be really helpful, again, to make sure that people are entering the right data, but also that they find these processes to be very efficient, right? That they're actually saving time rather than spending more time. We can auto-create different records, like our events, tasks, and deadlines using activity presets, and that can prompt people to keep their calendars up to date. And then we have some newer tools like our workflows and our formula fields. Workflows, which is the only additional module that's cited here, which can do things like send surveys automatically or create client alerts automatically, or do some of those automated pieces in the background that folks don't even need to pay attention to. They can just focus on their work and those records get created automatically. Formula fields, which will do some automatic calculations or automatically fill things in based on other things, which can be really useful. And those just, again, work completely in the background.